Okay, so imagine a single decade where the American dream basically flew as high as it could, only to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. A failure so big, it forced the entire country to reinvent itself. Well, that's the story of the 1930s. It's the story of the Great Depression and the New Deal. Let's get into it. So, to really get the crash, you've got to understand the party that came right before it. We're talking about the Roaring Twenties. This was a time of just incredible optimism. The economy was absolutely booming, new tech like cars and radios were changing everything, and it seriously felt like anyone and everyone could get rich. And the engine driving all this excitement? The stock market. It was a massive bull market, which is just a fancy way of saying stock prices were just going up and up and up. It really seemed like a sure thing. You'd buy a tiny piece of a company, watch its value climb, sell it, and boom, profit. People thought they had it all figured out. But here's the big secret. A lot of this wealth wasn't real. It was kind of like a magic trick. See, people were doing this super risky thing called buying on margin. Think about it like this. You want to buy a $100 stock, but you only put down $10 of your own money. You borrow the other 90. Now, as long as that stock price keeps rising, you're a genius. But what happens if it goes down? The whole thing was basically a house of cards, just waiting for a light breeze. And then, on October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday, that light breeze turned into a hurricane. Panic set in. People started selling like crazy, and within hours, the entire market just collapsed. All those fortunes that were built on paper and borrowed cash, they just vanished. For millions of people, everything they had was gone, just like that, in a single day. But the crazy thing is, the stock market crash wasn't the end of the story. No, it was just the beginning. It was like the first domino in a long line that was about to fall, and it plunged not just the country, but most of the world into the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in modern history. The best way to think about it is like a snowball rolling downhill. It just gets bigger and faster. So first, the market crashes. That means people can't pay back those loans they took out, so they default. Well, that causes the banks who gave out all that money to fail. And with the banks gone, businesses can't get loans, and people stop buying stuff, so businesses have to close. And that, of course, leads to unemployment just skyrocketing. You can see how each problem just fed the next one. So, how bad are we talking? At its absolute worst, almost 1 out of every 4 working Americans was unemployed. That's about 12 million people. Just stop and try to imagine that for a second. 1 out of every 4 people you know suddenly has no job. This was way more than just a recession. It was a complete and total economic meltdown. And the human cost of that 24% was just devastating. Families lost their homes, they had nowhere to go, and all over the country, these little shanty towns started popping up, built out of scrap wood and metal, anything people could find. And they had this grim nickname, Hoovervilles. It was a really bitter jab at the president, Herbert Hoover, who a lot of people felt was just not doing anything to help them. And this whole crisis really put a spotlight on 2 totally different ways of thinking. You had President Hoover, who basically believed in a hands-off approach. Government should stay out of it, the economy will fix itself eventually. But then came his successor, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, who rolled in with a completely different idea that in a crisis this huge, the government absolutely had a duty to take direct, bold action. So, in 1932, a desperate America voted for FDR in a landslide. He promised a New Deal for the American people. And this wasn't just some empty campaign slogan. It was a promise to completely change the relationship between the government and its citizens. And with these iconic words from his first speech as president, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. FDR just radiated confidence and hope to a country that was running on empty. He got to work immediately, declaring a national bank holiday to stop the panic and just launching this rapid-fire series of brand new programs. The New Deal was this whirlwind of programs, and people started calling them the alphabet agencies because of all the acronyms. To fix the broken banks, they created the FDIC to insure your deposits, which, by the way, we still have today. To fight all that unemployment, they started the CCC, which put millions of young guys to work planting trees and building parks. It was really an era of just pure experimentation. Let's try anything and everything to get the country back on its feet. But while all this was happening in Washington, what was life actually like for regular folks? Let's take a look at how people managed to survive one of the absolute toughest decades imaginable. So, as if the economic crisis wasn't bad enough, nature decided to throw a second punch. A massive drought hit the Great Plains and turned all this fertile farmland into what became known as the Dust Bowl. We're talking huge dust storms. They called them black blizzards that would literally blot out the sun and bury houses. It forced thousands and thousands of families to just abandon their land and head west, hoping to find work. All this hardship also started to reshape society in some really big ways. Labor unions got a lot more power with the Wagner Act. Women started taking on more visible roles, like Frances Perkins, the first ever female cabinet member, and of course, the incredibly influential First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. But that progress didn't reach everyone. While Black Americans started making a huge political shift to the Democratic Party, discriminatory housing policies, like redlining, where banks would literally draw red lines on a map around Black neighborhoods and refuse to give them loans, often shut them out from the benefits of these New Deal programs. So, how did people even cope with all this stress and uncertainty? Well, through escapism. Believe it or not, the 1930s became the golden age of Hollywood. For just a few pennies, you could go sit in a dark movie theater and just forget all your troubles. Get lost in movies like The Wizard of Oz or King Kong. Or you could huddle with your family around the radio and listen to music and shows. It was a lifeline. So, as the decade finally came to a close, one thing was crystal clear. The country and its government had been changed forever. The New Deal basically created a whole new blueprint for America. Now, it's a really common myth that the New Deal, all by itself, ended the Great Depression. The truth is, while it provided so much crucial relief and made huge reforms, the economy didn't fully truly recover until the U.S. started the massive, all-out government spending needed for World War II. But the legacy of the New Deal was never just about the economy. It was about completely reshaping America's future. And this is exactly why this piece of history still matters so much to you right now. Things like Social Security, the FDIC insurance that protects the money in your bank account, the SEC that acts like the police of Wall Street. These are huge parts of our modern lives, and every single one of them was born directly out of the crisis and the experimentation of the 1930s. And that brings us to the big, powerful question that America has been arguing about ever since. What is the government's proper role when the country faces a massive crisis? That fundamental fight between Hoover's hands-off idea and Roosevelt's hands-on approach, that set the stage for some of the biggest political debates that we are still having today. The arguments of the 1930s, well, they never really went away.